Welcome to Manager Tools. This week we have a special treat for you. Today is the 4th of July here in the United States when we celebrate our independence. As Wendy, one of my colleagues who is British, likes to say, the 4th of July is a reminder of the first or original Brexit. And we have a Hall of Fame cast for you. And it is one of probably the most famous in our 18-year history now. It is called the Juggling Koan. If you don't know, a koan is a Buddhist way of teaching things where the monks, the teachers, ask questions that often have very tricky answers. The classic one is, if a tree falls in a forest and there's no one there to hear it, does it make a sound? Interestingly enough, the answer is no. But you'd have to be a Buddhist monk to understand that. And we have a question for you in this cast. And then we provide some listeners' answers because they wrote in. And we also give the answer. It's about one of the most important things that separates managers from executives. I hope you enjoy the Juggling Koan.
Welcome to the Manager Tools podcast for Monday, January 15th, 2007. The Juggling Koan. Hi everyone, this is Mike, and welcome to Manager Tools. Mark recently blogged with our first ever management koan. What would an effective manager do? Now, it was clearly a big hit. We got like 45 responses within 2 to 3 days, which is clearly a record for blog post comments. Clearly, many of you want to know what the answer is, and that's great. The burning desire to get better at what we do is at the heart of all good managers. But Mark decided to keep us all waiting, including me. Well, the wait is over. This is the first for us, a show driven completely by a blog post and its response. In fact, we had to juggle the show lineup a bit to slide it in here in a timely fashion. So what's the show all about? Well, don't you want to know what an effective manager would do when throwing the 6th ball when she already is working 80 hours a week and juggling 20 other balls? Well, today we're going to find out. We're going to learn the right way of thinking on this issue, and then we're going to review every unique blog comment and provide insight as to what works and what doesn't. So, let's go. Well, this podcast is pretty neat for a lot of reasons.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? I'm excited.
Yeah, first of all, I'm thrilled that we got such a great response from your Juggling Koan blog post. That was pretty cool.
Yeah.
Of course, to be honest, I'm a little selfish here. We got over 8,000 registered members, and anything we can do to create more community is fantastic. So I loved the opportunity that folks had to weigh in, and people weighed in great numbers. So I was kind of digging that. I'm also happy, though, that we were able to share real issues. I mean, this wasn't theoretical. This was a real issue that, our listeners are struggling with. And to get the kind of response we did, I mean, we really struck a nerve here.
Yeah, I felt so too. And sometimes I miss that some of the basic stuff I deal with all the time with clients is very appealing to some people. Now, some topics are, some topics aren't. But then again, I was thinking from the standpoint of traffic. If a management consultant writes a blog post and nobody comes, was it ever really written?
Oh, God. Pretty soon you're going to be having me call you master or sensei.
No, you're the black belt. You are the black belt. I just meant that, we want to share stuff, commentary, ideas, recommendations from which our members derive value. The more we serve them, the more of them we get to serve. That's why we're here. That's pretty cool. For me, it was a moment of feeling like I was wrapped up in the mission, that we were helping them, that they were interested and excited. And so it was very cool, my friend.
Yeah. Well, I'm absolutely with you there. I also love that it was about a decision. We talk a lot about managers being, action oriented and getting things done. But we also have a lot to say, and we'll say more about it, about analytical skills and decision making.
I completely missed that, and you are exactly right. I have to blog about that and include one of my favorite stories. I'll call it "He Fixes Radios by Thinking." I think you're absolutely right, and we have to. I have to rethink some of the ways we talk about management, because we haven't talked as much about decision making and analytical skills.
Yeah. Well, we ought to just imagine at this point in the podcast, we have at least one of our listeners like screaming, "Dang it, guys, what's the bloody answer?" we probably need to stop dragging this out and get to it.
Right. There were some people getting antsy the day of the post, I think, or maybe even just the day after. So, well, yeah, you're right. Let's get to it.
Okay. Yeah, before we do that, though, let's make a couple announcements here. One, if people haven't figured it out by now, the show is a little bit different. Rather than going over the standard manager tools list of key points, today we're going to talk over the primary answer to Mark's blog post, and then we're going to get to some of the more subtle points by reviewing and some of the comments we got on the website. I suspect that we're not probably going to get to all the key points in the kind of the introductory piece here, because we're going to cover a lot of those as we get to the blog, the blog comments themselves.
Right.
So the commentary will be as important as the points we're going to cover up front. And there was a lot of good stuff in there. So because of that, we're going to be a little short on our core discussion, or as brief as Mark can be, because the supporting points we're going to make are going to be, of course, in our discussion of the blog post. Right. So first, before we do that, before we go on, why don't we restate, the problem for, the tens of thousands of listeners who may not have seen the post.
Good idea. Okay, so here it is. So you're a manager and you've got a boss and a team. Let's assume for a moment that all of your responsibilities, your goals and objectives, rolling up all your tasks, can be represented by a bucket of balls, as in juggling a lot of balls. For discussion purposes, let's just say that everybody, you, your boss, all 10 members of your team, has 20 balls in their bucket. You have 5 big balls, the ones your boss might well fire you for if you drop them, and you have 15 more smaller balls as well, so 5 plus 15, you have 20. Those smaller balls are also important, though not critical. Your 20 balls keep you very busy, sometimes 8-hour weeks, though not very often, and you take less vacation than you're allowed and less than your kids would like you to. Okay, we got it? Okay, now, I'm not saying this would actually ever happen, but one day your boss comes to you and presents you with another shiny big ball, your 6th big ball. What would an effective manager do? Would you refuse? Would you ask what balls of the other 5 or other 20 would he have you not do? Would you simply hope she wasn't going to notice that you're going to drop 5 or 6 or 7 of the small balls later?
Okay. That said, the critical question here, what is the answer?
Delegation.
Okay. Well, that was easy. All right. Well, thanks, my friend, as always. I appreciate it. See you next week.
Okay. Let me expand a little bit. In this situation, the effective manager accepts the responsibility and immediately begins delegating. Now, by the way, I just realized something, Mike. If you're given another small ball, you probably wouldn't necessarily delegate. I mean, just adding one more, maybe you can fit that into your schedule. I don't know.
Right. This wasn't a small ball.
Right, it wasn't. It was a big ball. The way an effective manager delegates is to look at all of her now 21 balls, determine what she herself needs to do, and that would include the 6 big balls, and what she needs to push down a level, or perhaps more than one level even. The most likely starting place is not the ball she just got because it's a big ball. Rather, she looks at her 15 small balls that she's juggling and gives away a reasonable number of those to her subordinates. Now, before we talk about how many she delegates, we probably have to make a point about the most important point in this entire cast, really, I think, which some posters correctly figured out. When a manager delegates a small ball, it grows in size as it moves down the chain of command. When you delegate a small ball to one of your directs, it becomes one of their big balls to juggle, in most cases.
Right, because they don't have the capabilities you have in terms of getting that task done.
Okay. Exactly. Further, you have several people to delegate to, in most cases, so the burden is going to spread out. You could give each of your directs one of your small balls, getting rid of 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 of them. They all get one more big ball, and of course, then they have some decisions to make about their workload. Now, to me, it's pretty obvious. Is it pretty obvious how beautiful a situation this is? You're going to have to assess what your workload is, and how many and to whom you're going to delegate your smaller responsibilities. You got to know your folks. Managers who do one-on-ones are better at that than those who don't. Okay, so one-on-ones are tied into this. Further, your folks are going to be stretched, so there's going to be more opportunities for feedback. Bigger chances for success, so more positive feedback as well. More coaching, because they're going to be learning to do something that they've probably never done before. To me, what this does is it shows that more responsibilities coming into your organization exposes the beauty and the art of delegation. Everybody has to do more, and this is how you develop. Our management muscles grow and develop when we're given more responsibilities. When it's caused by new business or opportunities for no business, it's the perfect picture of the modern major organization. Growth from internal strength, higher productivity, profitability. It's funny to me how everybody always complains about getting more work, but then kind of doesn't want to talk about the other side, or fails to realize that that's how most of us grow. To say nothing of the fact that people profess to want a promotion, which carries more work with it anyway. And for those people who would say, well, no, I'll take the promotion because then I get paid more, I'll be willing to do more work. If you're waiting for the perfectly equitable exchange of more work for more pay, don't hold your breath.
Yeah, I can't believe how many times I hear that, which is, I'll take the more work as long as you pay me first. Don't go down that rabbit hole.
How many times have we had that conversation? Yeah. Okay. Now look, there are some assumptions that are built into this juggling Koan that are not just for the purpose of avoiding somebody pulling a Captain Kirk on the Kobayashi Maru. So let's just talk about a couple of them briefly. First, we always assume that bosses have already considered bandwidth and workload when they delegate. Now, they might not like that they're delegating. They may think that everybody's really, really busy, but they wouldn't be delegating if they didn't believe it was a good thing to do. The fact is, folks, very, very few managers engage in predatory or unethical or unprofessional delegation. In fact, if you're a young manager and you believe that somebody is doing that, I would encourage you just to catch yourself and go, what? Maybe it's because I'm young. Maybe because I'm new. Maybe I don't know any better. Maybe if I were walking in her shoes, I would realize, boy, this delegation was tough, but it was the right thing to do under the circumstances. Those managers who've gotten to a certain level know that they just can't push off all their work on you and then leave early every day. So a big part of the reason we make that point is because if you're always trying to evaluate whether this particular delegation is just being dumped on you or whether it really is a good delegation and you like the work, your manager sees that. Your ability to be enthusiastic, I think, is significantly attenuated by your attempted analysis of something that you can't possibly know enough about, as in your boss getting a direct order from her boss. So if it's not clear, we encourage enthusiastic responses to a big ball delegation. I could talk about this for hours, but here it is simply. What would you begin to feel if all of your directs started accepting new projects and responsibilities with no interest, no curiosity, no creativity, or, quite frankly, with a little bit of arms crossed, I don't know why you're doing this to me. Whatever you might think of your team in that situation is a good bet for what your boss would think of you. Now, look, I don't think anybody made a comment similar to one I've heard before recently, which goes like this. Well, this is proof for the slack theory.
Oh, God.
Yeah, you know where I'm going with this. Meaning that I should always leave a little of my schedule free to allow for these kinds of things.
That's so incredibly backward thinking.
It is. This is dumbness. I mean, this is a codified dumbness, I think. It is economically terribly inefficient to grow out of slack. It's infinitely superior to stretch and to growth.
That is probably that for me. That is going to be, I'm sure, at the end of this podcast, one of the key points of the entire podcast.
Okay, now what do you think, Mike? Do you think people are out there thinking we need Slack?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
That is scary.
Particularly now, for those of you in IT or technology organizations, I came out of one, so you can't be upset at me. Now, if Mark says it, maybe you can, but that kind of thinking,
nice.
that kind of thinking is embedded in most IT organizations because of the way work is managed.
Yeah.
So
the rigidity and mechanism, the mechanistic nature of managing IT work.
Yeah.
At some level, it ends up pinching the middle manager. Yeah.
Yeah. You give me a new requirement, and therefore something else has to drop out of it. I mean, that's the immediate initial response, and it's an unhealthy initial response. I know why it's there, but anyway, so we could go down a rabbit hole there. So we will.
Yeah. Right. Why would I pay you to sit around when I can find somebody else to do the whole job and then stretch them while I learn while they learn and I challenge them? And look, when you're a manager, you have a responsibility to grow your people anyway. So
delegation is how you do that.
Right? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly right. I want to continue one more thing about the economic theme here a little bit. Later, we're going to address about what do we do when we get to the bottom of the chain and the bottom folks have to get rid of some stuff. Not accepting a delegation because folks at the bottom already have full plates is economic suicide. Think about the difference to the organization as a whole and that big ball 5 levels up and a bunch of small balls at the bottom. Add to that the additive quality that balls get bigger as they drop down a level. Look, the math just supports delegation. Okay.
Yeah. And some balls will fall on the ground and some balls should fall on the ground.
Yes, exactly.
Right.
Yeah, we should make that clear. Yeah. Because look, you just remind me of a point I tell client managers all the time. Let's not argue that you get everything done.
Right.
Because the first rule of organizational life, of executive life and managerial life is there is always work undone every day. Nobody finishes all their work and goes home every day. Right. The only question in time management and priority management is, what work are you not going to do? And in order to get to that question, you darn well better know what work you're going to do.
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah, does the right work get done?
Yes, exactly.
And unfortunately, most of the work that gets done is the C priorities versus the A priorities. But
yeah, because you can, and they feel good, and they're smaller, and hey, I got 11,000 things done today, none of which make a bit of difference. But strategy is still not in place. Yeah. Yes, exactly. Right. Okay, so look, on to the great comments we got from so many members. We just had a ball reading them and talking about them. And for those of you who are worried about our comments, since we're going to be giving commentary on comments, let's look a couple of things real quick. First of all, we're nice. We might disagree with you, but it's in the best spirits that we have. And second, there are hundreds of people who read the post, I guess really thousands, who read the post and didn't have the chutzpah to put their answer down. So kudos to all the posters. We appreciate it. We're not going to read every single post, but we will characterize them, and we will lump some together when the comments are very, very similar. So our first post from Wendy, who we know is from England, is actually one of our top 10 most prolific forum members. She didn't make a comment so much as refer us to a forum post that I had made in response to a manager who's worried about being asked to do more work and whether or not it was a recipe for failure. My answer was no, it's not. Attack the problem with gusto and you'll grow into it. Kudos to Wendy for being on the right track. Don't say no to the boss. Mike said, a different Mike, not Ozan, but said he'd ask his boss to prioritize the new ball fits.
Yeah, that worried me a little bit.
Yeah. When your boss delegates to you, even if you don't know exactly what to do and how to do it, your boss probably won't insult you by telling him how to do your own work. It's your job to prioritize your work. So, Mike, don't ask your boss. Do it yourself. Tell him. And if he needs to adjust you, he will. Okay? Nico was the first poster that didn't have any management experience. At least he said that. Nico, thanks for taking a shot. I'm glad you did. Alas, it's pretty clear you're an IT guy. You let users prioritize your features. And you basically said, so we should go back to our boss, say I'm already busy, I can't do any more. Which ball do you want me to drop? Our response to that is, isn't Manager Tools great? You can learn this stuff before you're a manager. We would urge not that approach. Your boss may well say to you, hey, who's your best guy? I want him to do the job. Nico at one point said, when you say the decision, when I give it back to him and say, which one do you want me to do? And you say the decision lies in his court and not yours, that's dangerous, I think.
Yeah.
We are not playing hot potato here.
Yeah, I never expected my managers to play the game of trying to throw things back in my court continually.
Yeah, and you alluded to this earlier from the IT perspective, Mike. This is a classic case of, because IT work has this rigidity associated with, well, I say this will have this many hours, or it'll take this much of that. The whole mechanistic kind of viewpoint of coding and testing and so on, therefore at the middle manager level or at the first level supervisor or manager level, there's a sense of, well, we're full, and there's truth to fullness. Not we can be creative, we can be flexible, we can figure out a different way, a better way, a faster way, or we can look at risks and mitigate them. There's just kind of a we're full thing, which is essentially, while we understand that there has to be some standards for IT stuff, because if it's wrong, it will break and the system won't work at all. Whereas bad marketing can be put into the marketplace. I'm sure IT people will love to hear that. It's just that, of course, the bad marketing won't work in terms of sales, but the computer will still run with bad marketing in it.
It sounds like you're describing an IT organization that I knew of like almost a decade ago that you consulted on. I wonder whose that would be.
Okay, but no. I was actually thinking about one more current. No, actually, I'm thinking about client organization.
Well, the point is they're not much different. Our experience has been that most are very, very similar in terms of their basic thinking. Some get out of it, but there is this, due to the kind of nature of the work, there is this tendency to fall into this thinking on a regular basis, even when it's not appropriate. So,
yeah, good. Okay. Steve Pinn said he delegates something to one of his directs. Good job, Steve. G.R. Regas says delegate and coach. And he was the first to say the manager's small balls are bigger than the direct report small balls, which kind of goes to our point about balls growing in size as they fall a level. So good job, GR. Jay Hill said to work with a boss to figure out which of the big balls to delegate to direct. About the only time you want to delegate a big ball, everybody, is when you're delegating it to a key number two, perhaps your right-hand person, somebody who's clearly growth ready, and it's a developmental project for the career. It's not to be done lightly. We generally recommend you, as a manager, holding on to all of your big balls.
Yeah. It might be somebody who you've already identified to your boss as ready to promote if you leave. This is the person who's going to get the job, and this. But you want to think about it. It's not if you're delegating a big ball, it should be in the context of development and coaching versus removing stuff off of your plate.
Good. Yes. Oh, that's a good distinction. Yeah. Okay, good. Steve says to enthusiastically accept the big ball. Way to go, Steve. He says it's an honor and a privilege. I love that. That kind of attitude just endears you to your boss, and I don't think it's sucking up. I just think it's professional is really what it boils down to. On the other hand, Steve said that he didn't say he would delegate. He said if things went well, staff would be hired. Hiring staff is nothing to be proud of. And I actually give Steve some credit because he's actually saying if we're swamped and the business justifies it, we'll be able to hire people. And I will agree with that. I don't want to pick on him too much.
Yeah, but it shouldn't be the first response when getting a big ball.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. We want the organization to grow, but we don't want our budgets to grow. That's something that most managers miss. We want the organization to grow, but we don't want our budget to grow. Budget growth is counter to the organization's success.
Go into a little bit more in terms of what you mean by that. I mean, so growth is not growing your organization size; it's growing the capabilities of your organization to do work with the same number of resources, right?
Yeah, exactly. I'm not a huge fan of productivity measures, which I know in some consulting organizations are really, really big, and billable hours and chargeable hours, and even IT organizations, right? But I am interested in productivity. I'm interested in people doing more next week than they did this week. The human being is an incredibly elastic incredibly challengeable and growable entity. And I just think that if your company is growing by 8% a year and your budget is growing by 8% a year, at some point you will stumble because you're not getting any more profitable. And organizations need profit in order to fund new opportunities. Profit is not a four-letter word. And everybody should not be so busy trying to get their piece of the pie that they forget that if the big pie grows, regardless of how big a piece of pie you get, over time, you're going to get more pie. And a really profitable company tends to have more to shower on their people in terms of bonuses and salaries and so on. So I generally recommend that delegation and growth of people is the way you allow your company, if everybody does it, allows the company to make more money, but with the same amount of people and not asking people to burn out. And I think in the long run, that's better.
Right. So new big balls doesn't mean new staff.
Exactly. Yeah. B. Flynn says he agrees with G.R. Regas, and the new big ball goes to one of his directs. We've already recommended against that. He says he wants the boss to see him as a problem solver, and we definitely agree with that. Drink Coffee says that Drucker says managers can only juggle one or two balls. Well, actually, Drucker said executives could be truly effective by focusing on one or two things. He never said they wouldn't end up doing 10 to 15 things. He was talking about how many big balls they could handle. I like the thinking because I like everything about Drucker, but it does lead to a place that may not be great. The idea that we should push back. Pushing back is not a good idea, folks. Jamie, I think from the UK, said that he'd meet with customers with a new big ball and figure out what needs to be done, then look at consolidating things. It's always good to look at consolidating and readjusting. Sometimes, though, balls don't really have customers. That may be an IT-driven comment. This is more of a hierarchical issue than a customer-supplier issue. But I think what he talks about is reasonable. RX-Men said he'd delegate some of his small balls, his small 15 to his directs. Bingo. I don't know how to pronounce this next one. Arsengaew. He said, hey, rethrow some of your smaller balls to the next juggler down the line. I love that. I love the analogy taken a little bit further. And you'll have to expect that at the end of the line, some of the small balls will have to be dropped. And if he says, if you're lucky, there are so many jugglers in between you and them that they appear very small compared to your new big one, which that's generally true. And of course, if you're unlucky, he says you were at the end of the line. But then again, you probably wouldn't be a manager, would you? Well said. He's right in almost every way. But Murphy's Law grabs him at the end when he says, no matter what your place in line is, shame on you for accepting 20 balls at once in the first place. Folks, when you're a member of an organization, you're going to have to do more work than you probably think is reasonable. You're going to have to do some things that your boss tells you to do. There are far too many people in organizations today who are getting clever and crowing about avoiding work. There's no pride in avoiding work that legitimately needs to be done by the organization.
Yeah, I could agree with him in some sense, and not in accepting the 20 balls. The fact that you have 20 balls may not be the right thing, and I'd say that 90% of managers, despite how they think, are terrible at delegation, which might be one of the reasons why you currently have 20 balls. So one could argue that you started off, that the position you start off at the beginning of this exercise is too many balls because you're already terrible at delegating.
Yeah. Good. Okay, Pierre Giorgio, our most prolific forum poster, and a fine gentleman to boot, said he'd go for scope reduction and user prioritization. We're going to have to disagree here a little bit because we believe in delegation. That's an IT comment, I think, a technical comment. And we know that Pierre Giorgio is in an IT organization. And I think now we've already talked about the IT world's biases here a little bit. One of the things that scares me about that is that if you have this mechanistic org view, it's dangerous when you're an IT manager and you start moving up the ladder. Is you come in contact with other non-IT managers as peers, say when you're all directors or VPs, you'll see folks who don't have these restrictions on how they look at work. I have to say that if the CIO said to the CIO, if the CIO said to his CEO, sorry, I'll get that right, he says, I'm scoped out, we can't do this, the CEO would look up and say, well, what are you doing that you shouldn't be doing? Because we're wanting you to do this. I see this a lot in IT organizations. I think it's a weak spot. We've already talked about it.
Yeah, I think a lot of IT managers end up, over the course of their career, developing kind of a standard response to new work by pushing back. And I mean, there's a lot of reasons for that, which we don't need to go into, but the fact is that as you go up, if you develop this reflexive response of quote unquote, protecting your people,
yes,
by the time you get to be kind of VP, say CIO level, you'll never get there. You'll never get there because your response is always reflexively, well, we're pretty booked. I don't know, we can do it. Let me go back and see come back to you with some recommendations on what to drop. And CEOs don't like those responses typically.
Yeah, in fact, I had one manager say once, I got lucky when I was early in my career. I didn't know what to do, so I said that. And a senior manager said to me, boy, good answer. And the younger person said, well, what do you mean by that? He says, well, you're pushing back. He says, well, actually, I'm really not pushing back. I just don't see how we're going to get this done. He says, oh, well, you got to learn. You got to do that every time. That way, if he's really not serious about it, he won't give you the work. That's bad training of a peer.
Right. We probably need to do something dedicate a whole podcast to this particular topic, because I know people are going to walk away from this conversation going, we didn't provide a lot of detail. So we'll put that on our list of things to come back to.
Yeah, and I don't know how many IT managers I know who are now VPs and above who said, yeah, all my career. I said, yeah, boss, I can do that. And I was their go-to person. And my people weren't any more busy than anybody else because we were more effective and figured out how to become more productive, and we delegated. And so, okay. Steve Penn made another comment that he thought his team could brainstorm and figure out and get buy-in. So that's a good thing. US 41, I always wonder where on that great road he lives, said that the Zen answer is to do nothing and to see what happens.
It's bold. Gotta give him that.
Yeah, he did make the first Kobayashi Maru attack on the scenario, saying that working 8-hour weeks and not spending enough time with the kids is bad enough, and he'd develop an exit strategy and leave. So that makes it easy for us. Bye. I'm kidding. He also said he was a manager tools evangelist. Thanks for that. And that this post, he thinks the post, I think his post has merit. I did put in the 8-hour weeks thing just to give you some sense that the answer could not be, and writing posts like this is hard to make it so that we narrow the focus, but we didn't want the answer to be, I'll just work harder. He also assumed the manager had kids because he did, and I love that. And the Koan really probably should have read, what would you do? I was trying to suggest everyone is effective, but of course not US 41 because he quit. No, I'm kidding. I think it was a good post. I think it challenged us, and I think it was good. Skinny one, whose name is Tom, and I knew that because of his screen name. It's so different. He said he'd go to his boss and put some other stuff on the back burner, and that has always worked for him. We know that matrix organizations definitely limit one's delegation abilities, but it's been my experience it's not as much as managers think. I would bet there are plenty of IT and matrix execs who shop a project until they find somebody who will enthusiastically accept it. Eric Waller said he was new to this, and again, I want to say well done for making the effort. Eric would ask his boss to reduce the number of large or small balls or get more resources. Eric, not a good plan. But at least he backs it up by saying if his boss couldn't live with us, he'd politely decline, saying further it's important to know when he would say when.
I don't know how you do that, but okay.
Yeah, I do like it when somebody backs up their decisions with values. And when I read about Eric politely declining, I was reminded of the quote by Churchill, if you have to execute a man, it costs nothing to be polite. Eric, I don't think you're going to last very long politely declining all the time. And I'm not so sure your people will be thrilled that you politely decline.
I don't even know how you can do that.
Yeah. Well, I think what he was saying was I politely decline, and then I'd get my desk all cleaned out.
Oh, okay.
I don't know. Maybe he thinks I don't know. I don't have any problem with somebody in the organization politely declining and saying, well, gee, I really need you to do this work. Well, I'm politely declining. Okay. It's been great knowing you. And I don't have any problem with that. I mean, I don't want to hire too many of them because I'll be busy recruiting all the time. But it was a real sign of toughness that he's new to this, and he posted. And so I say, if you ever need somebody to work with you, Eric, I'll help. Cloud Rider said he'd push back with his reasons. Then he saves it by saying, if this isn't sufficient, and Cloud Rider, it's not, he'd ask the boss for help in prioritizing. That's better, though, not ideal. He also said something interesting. He said, if I gave my subordinates something they couldn't handle, I'd expect pushback. I agree. I thought this, those people work for you and you're responsible for their output. How can you be responsible for output without knowing your own scope? T. Jordan makes a clever move to give his boss feedback about the impact of the project. He also said he'd accept that feedback from his team. And because T. Jordan said nice things about manager tools in his post, we're not going to say that while T. Jordan may tolerate this feedback from his team, we're not as nice as T. Jordan. No, we're always open to feedback. We generally recommend staying away from negotiating with your boss, though we do know there are times when it's reasonable. But it's never the first thought we should have.
That's the key point in all this, right? We're not saying that you may never have to go back and negotiate scope with your boss, but that shouldn't be your initial response for sure.
Right. David Mold, a.k.a. Fungal Guy, says it's time to cascade small balls. We agree. Way to go. He says, ideally give the balls to the directs with the strengths to handle them. Nice one. Aaron admits he talks himself into a circle, and he's smart and passionate enough that he convinced me. I loved your post, Aaron. He says, excerpted, I'm working 8 hours a week, but not often. What does that mean? Once a month, once a quarter, once a year? Come on, Aaron, cut me some slack. We could have written 5 pages and still not answered everybody's questions about the hypothetical situation we were put you in. And then he also says, boss drops big snarly ballo challenge in my lap. I love it. Okay, so I really liked Aaron's post. He did write himself in a circle a little bit. Next post, aspiring CEO. I don't think that name means what you think it means, but he said he'd delegate the 15 small balls to the folks who can handle them. Probably too many delegations there, but still, it's a delegation answer, so kudos.
There's a good point might be worth talking about, though, is when delegating, you've created another small ball for yourself, right, which is the act of delegating and coaching and all the additional things you need to do in delegating. So when you delegate a task, it doesn't go completely away. You still have some remaining responsibility around delegation. So if you think that you can delegate 4 of your small balls to make room for this one big ball, then maybe you want to go with 5, right?
Right.
I don't think we can make this mathematical, but the point is, if you're going to delegate effectively, there is some oversight required that you need to think about.
Good. I totally agree. Stuart said he did want the new big ball, and that he'd tell his team members to drop some balls. There's a nugget of truth there. If they're at the bottom of the food chain, if everything can't be done, the low value added tasks need to be the ones that get killed. And there are always things that can be killed. Every single time I'm involved in what amounts to a GE workout situation and we look at policies and processes and procedures, I am stunned by the stuff that people do because they think they're supposed to do it and because the managers at lower levels are not cleaning things up on a regular basis. Harry said he'd meet with his team and ask whether they think he can or should handle it. I don't think I do that, but he sells it well. And then he goes on to talk about how that leads to delegation, which we love. He also said he had a role in helping his team streamline and reprioritize once things get pushed down. And I think this is important. We don't want to push back, but we as managers can, when we delegate, reach down and offer to help folks with the mess that's left. It's a question of timing first and then of coaching and developing later. So that was good. Harry, good job. Thomas had one of my favorite posts. He said, all things being equal, I would treat the additional responsibilities as an expression of my manager's trust and faith in me and gladly accept. The exception might be if I really was already struggling to cope, and this would tip me over the edge. I worry that a lot of people think they're always on the edge. Or if the responsibility was a poison pill. There's not that's so rare I'm not even going to talk about it. But he says, I'd emulate my manager's behavior and delegate responsibility for some of my small balls to my team members, just as my boss is delegating what is a small ball for him to me. I would loathe to delegate a big ball. It's good. Of course, I would ask for any resources related to the new responsibility. Okay, good. But I didn't get the sense that Thomas said, but I've got to have it, or that's a negotiation point. And then he said something at the end. He says, this may well be a right answer, but I'm interested to see if there's an answer which everyone will recognize as such. That's a little bit of a challenge for us. But when you're lacking direction from somebody, I really will tell you that as managers, we're going to have to make choices. And you should make your choice, and you should prosecute it with vigor and find out what happens. M.H. Byers, or M. Hybers, said he would consider whether or not it was reoccurring and make decisions based on that after accepting. That's a good factor to consider, one I normally don't. I'm gonna say thanks for helping me think better on that one. I may do that and just not realize it, but I think it's a good consideration to have. Frank said he always asks for a reprioritization and provides impacts for each to his customers. He suggests considering the cost impact, managing expectations. I think this has the ring of an IT answer, and as such, we certainly understand it, and yet, okay, we've made our point about IT managers, right?
Yeah, we're beating this.
Okay, good. Right. Non-manager Ken had an answer that suggests he needs to get promoted. He says, I'm not a manager. He says, I assume the size of the balls correspond to their importance. And basically, he goes on and on and on, and he takes like 7 paragraphs, and then at the end he says, and then in too many paragraphs, is my answer to Mark's question. It was very well done. It basically says, I'm going to delegate, I'm going to work with my team, I'm going to reprioritize. He says the remaining displaced small balls can either be ignored or not ignored, and if they can be ignored, they're never that important in the first place. If they can't be ignored, I'll present the remaining small balls to my boss and request more resources. Now that's a little bit of a negative. If he rejects allocating resources to these small balls and he doesn't feel they're important enough, and I adjust my priorities to be in line with my boss, and these small balls may be ignored. Or, more precisely, we figure out how to grow into doing more than we did last week. Andrew Stock starts out with...
Ken, go ahead and send excerpts of this podcast to your boss and see if Mark promoting you made a difference. So.
Andrew Stock starts out with, the sixth big ball. It is somewhat of an archetype, isn't it, Andrew? He goes on to say he would accept the ball and then have a meeting to figure it all out. I like that. Several people talked about involving their team in the figuring out of what to do, and that's always a good idea. I generally would not recommend going into that meeting not knowing anything. I think you should have a point of view. I think you should have a structure or a framework in your head of what it's going to end up looking like, and you may want to steer the conversation at times. I think that was a really good answer. And then he also says, following our meeting, clear goals and objectives will be agreed to and posted. I'm not terribly good about posting goals and objectives, but I like the fact that we're trying to tie everything together. Pete Howard has a good answer. He says, accept the ball graciously, recognizing it as the compliment it is. Explain to the boss you'll need to go away and plan how to include this work with existing commitments, and agree with the boss a date and time to present that plan back to them. I like the way he's thinking there. And I like this. Go away and do the maths. Include trusted lieutenants. I like it. It was a good post.
It's a very nice, very good answer, I think.
BWA asks if you can break one of your big balls up into 5 or 6 or 7 small ones. And our response is, sure you can, as long as the work's getting done. Yeah. The problem is that does make it a little bit harder to keep track of things. And if it's one of your big balls, I've seen a lot of managers worry a lot about doing that. But if you want to, you can.
Well, the nature is a lot of your work that in fact is the work.
Right.
Of the big ball. So
Exactly, yeah. Ian Moffat says, explain to your boss that you believe your team is at full capacity. And I went, oh, this is going to be a bad answer. But then he says, go on to say that you want to deliver. And he says, I'm yet to work for anyone who prefers a problem over a solution. Ian, I agree. Say your boss should go away and explore the feasibility of getting everything done. Give a date and time, you get back to him and her. And I think you're a fine line there about, hey, I'll get back to you about whether or not I'm going to do this. I'm laughing a little bit, but it would be very much a matter of how you pitch that. And I think when you say, look at the work, can it realistically be done by you and or your team? I think it can be just because your boss says it can be. And I don't believe that some of the comments from people that say things like, well, we're always just so busy, they're always giving us more to do, as we said at the top of the show.
I think it's possible that people come back to us after this and said we're being kind of Pollyanna about the whole capacity of their organizations. And I just think that in these kind of theoretical responses to our post, folks assume like that their boss is never logical. And I think we rebel against that a little bit.
I'll tell you something though. If I'm a boss, Mike, if you're my boss and I've got a team beneath me, I don't. There's a part of me that says I don't really care about the logic when you're giving me something. In fact, for you, if your boss says you will get this done, then it's completely logical. I think I don't know that it's so much logical as it is mechanistic that, well, we don't have the time.
Yeah, that's my point. That's my point. There is logic that your boss, you got to give some credit to your boss that they've thought about it. They have an understanding of your organization, your capacity.
Yes.
And they may have a better understanding of that than, frankly, you do.
Right.
And so the initial mechanistic response is say, I'm full, all my people are 100% committed. I don't know. We got to watch that response.
Yeah, exactly. That's a watchword from the show. Is that we be careful. If that's your first response, you're stepping on shaky ground, and it could get worse depending upon how this thing goes. Remember something else too. Suppose in this analogy that I'm talking about, Mike has a boss, and the reason Mike is giving me a big ball is because Mike has 10 direct reports. He was given something from his boss. And he is now delegating 10 of his small balls to each of his directs. And I'm getting one, and it's a big ball. So he's been given something really important. The reason we're doing this is because something hugely important, a brand new strategic initiative or something, is happening in the organization. Mike's been given the key opportunity to lead it, which makes him look good, which makes us look good. We're really excited for Mike. And what that means is Mike's not going to say no to his boss because we're all fully busy down here. He's going to say, my gosh, I got a chance to lead a new project that's going to bring us in an extra $100 million in revenue. I'm supporting it on the internal side, or I'm marketing it, or I'm selling it or something. Of course I'm going to do that. Well, then he looks at his scope and he says, okay, I can't do everything. I've got 10 balls here I've got to get rid of. Look, what do you know? I've got 10 directs. It's a silly answer. It's a silly parable, if you will, but we make the math work to make it easy for everybody. Is that he gives 10 of his small balls away to give him the scope to handle that one new big one, which is enormously important for the organization. And that just means that the flow down is that each of me and my 9 peers all get one more big ball. And in this particular case that we're talking about here, my directs are each going to get one more big ball. And all of this is a function of the organization saying, Mike's big ball is very important, and we can't say because we're all full we can't do it.
Yeah, if you say no, what are you really saying to your boss? That's
yeah. What you're saying is you were wrong to accept that responsibility.
Right.
Huh.
Yeah,
and not a good call. And I think that's it. I think that covers all of the comments.
Good. Well, this didn't take as long as I thought it would. This is going to be a long podcast, but hopefully folks will have stuck with us up to this point.
I just like to say, Mike and I, take very seriously the fact that everybody spends time with us, listening to the podcast and going to the website and spending time on the discussion forums. We continue to add 20, 30, 40 new people every day, which adds up. And it just means a great deal to us. We know that you're often struggling as managers. We are too. And there are times when you don't know what to do. And we're glad that there's a resource that you can at least turn to a little bit for some of the issues that you face on a regular basis. And we don't take lightly the time that you give us every week at all three places, the website and the forum, and of course with the podcast.
Right.
And so thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. I'd also like to ask folks for some feedback in terms of how well this particular format works and whether you enjoyed it as, I'd like to know whether or not this format works for you or not.
Yeah. I hope it didn't get too repetitive. I worry a little bit about that. But
yeah. All right.
Great.
Thank you, my friend.
Thanks, partner.
We'll see you later. Well, there you go. How to handle that sixth ball when you think you can barely handle what you have. Now, we didn't talk a lot about how to delegate, and our longtime listeners know we have, as always, some thoughts on that. If you haven't listened to our August 22nd, 2005 show on delegation, now might be a good time. You'll find it in the archives on the website. If you have any more questions on this topic, please do join us in the discussion forums, www.manager-tools.com/forums. All right then, until next week, so long everyone.